Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a tough but really crucial topic. Why does doing good in the world, specifically mission work, so often seem to come with, well, a heavy dose of suffering? And what does it actually take to keep going?
Yeah, it's a big question. And the sources you shared, they're pretty powerful. We've got everything from ancient biblical stories and deep theological ideas to firsthand accounts of church history, how it spread, and then some really, frankly, quite disturbing reports on modern persecution.
It's a lot. And what jumps out immediately, I think, is how all these different sources, centuries apart, different places, they all point to this consistent pattern. It's like challenge and hardship are almost baked into this kind of work.
It's definitely not presented as an anomaly, more like the norm, almost.
Exactly. So our goal in this deep dive is to really try and understand why. Why isn't it just smooth sailing when you're trying to, bring hope or help?
And maybe even more importantly, how does that sheer determination, perseverance, how does that not just help people get through it, but actually change things, transform the suffering itself, maybe?
Makes you wonder, right? If the goal is positive, why all the resistance?
Yeah.
And that's what I want you, the learner, to think about too. In your own life, when you've chased something really meaningful, have you noticed obstacles just cropping up? What these sources are suggesting, in this mission context anyway, is that maybe those hurdles aren't just bad luck. Maybe they're fundamental. Like they actually shape the mission, shape the people involved.
In unexpected ways, perhaps?
Could be. Okay, so let's dig in. The first big point for the sources is basically this. Suffering in mission isn't rare. It's a pattern.
Yeah.
Deeply ingrained.
And the sheer weight of evidence is striking. It's not just one story here or there.
No, definitely not. Look at the Bible, for instance. The Old Testament prophets. Time after time, they faced rejection, mockery.
Yeah, even violence.
Right? Just for delivering a message they felt was vital. It shows early on that challenging things often brings opposition.
And then you get to the New Testament, Apostle Paul.
Yeah.
His story is just relentless.
Well, yeah. Shipwrecks, beatings, prison, hunger, thirst. He lists it all out in 2 Corinthians. It's intense.
And then, of course, the central figure, Jesus himself, his life ending in rejection, crucifixion. These aren't footnotes. They seem central to the narrative.
Exactly. They're presented almost as expected.
And theology tries to grapple with this, right? The sources touch on things like theodicy. Why does a good God allow suffering? Maybe it's tied to free will.
Or the idea of refinement. Suffering as a way to strengthen faith, like testing metal.
Yeah, that concept comes up. And the theology of the cross, which really emphasizes sacrifice, humility, even through suffering, as being key to, well, to the whole point.
These aren't easy answers, obviously, but they offer frameworks for understanding why hardship exists, even when pursuing good.
And then shifting to today, the sources paint a really concerning picture of modern persecution. It's apparently intensifying globally.
Yeah, and in so many brutal forms. There are horrific violent attacks, mentioned places like Nigeria, Sri Lanka, Pakistan.
And then the reality of imprisonment, even torture in countries like North Korea, China, Iran.
Yeah.
It's terrifying stuff.
It really is. But it's not just the extreme violence, is it?
No, and that's crucial. The sources also highlight the systemic discrimination, marginalization. Think India, Egypt.
Right. And intense social pressure, isolation, things that can tear families and communities apart just for their beliefs.
It's a whole spectrum of hardship.
And beyond those direct attacks, one source talks about the unseen cost of mission. What did you make of that?
That was interesting. It gets into things like spiritual warfare, sort of the internal and external pressures that try to undermine commitment.
Okay, like battling doubt or direct opposition to your core values.
Yeah, and also the inevitable cultural clashes when you challenge norms, plus the huge personal sacrifices, emotional, psychological toll, leaving comfort behind.
It's a really complex picture of the obstacles. Yeah. So, given all that, how do people keep going? That's where perseverance comes in, right?
Right.
Is absolutely essential.
Yes, and the way the sources define it is key. It's not just passively enduring, not just gritting your teeth.
Okay, so what is it then?
It's presented as an active commitment, a determined, ongoing choice to keep striving, because you deeply believe in the mission's power for change.
Right, holding on to that vision, that purpose, even when things are incredibly tough, like Paul did. Constantly facing setbacks, but never quitting.
And remember that point about the early church, when persecution scattered them?
Yeah, Acts 8, it looked like a disaster.
But it actually led to the message spreading wider. What seemed like defeat became a catalyst for growth. It's counterintuitive.
It really is. And there's a theological link too, isn't there? Perseverance leading to, like, spiritual renewal.
Exactly. The sources suggest that this active struggle can deepen one's connection to the divine, reframing the hardship as part of a bigger spiritual journey.
One source shared that story of Elias. Was that meant to illustrate this?
I think so, as an example of just sticking with it resolutely in a really hostile place. It highlights the courage needed.
And you see that courage in those underground churches too, right? Iran, China, North Korea, thriving against all odds. That's incredible resilience.
It really underscores the power of that active perseverance.
But what actually comes out of all this suffering and effort? The sources argue there's a transformative power at work.
Yeah, that phrase, crucible of calling, really stuck with me.
What does that mean exactly?
It suggests the hardships aren't just obstacles to get past and forget. They actually do something to you. They refine you, deepen your commitment.
Okay, so the struggle itself changes the person.
That's the idea. We see it in the biblical view, too. Trials aren't random pain. They're potential catalysts for transformation, for advancing God's will as they see it.
Like Paul again. His trials became his testimony, in a way.
Right. And that metaphor of gold being purified by fire, the difficulties burn away impurities, leaving something stronger.
And the theological angle builds on that. Suffering fostering growth.
Yes, things like humility, empathy for others who suffer, and making your witness, your message more authentic because you've lived through it.
And this isn't just theory. The sources mention modern examples, like believers in prison.
Who report their faith actually deepened during that time, which is incredible.
It really is. And that paradoxical joy you sometimes hear about among persecuted groups, it challenges how we usually think about happiness and suffering.
Completely. So if suffering is so common and perseverance is so vital, where does the strength come from? How do people sustain it?
Good question. The sources point to a few key wellsprings. Prayer comes up a lot.
But not as wishful thinking, right? Not as an escape button.
No, more as a way to connect, to find divine presence even in the worst times. Think Paul and Silas singing in prison.
Or Jesus in Gethsemane. Or the early church praying for boldness when threatened.
Right. It's presented as something that changes from the inside out. Fear to courage, despair to hope.
And alongside prayer, there's this idea of spiritual fortitude.
Built through what? Scripture. Worship.
Yeah, consistent engagement with Scripture, seen as an anchor, providing perspective, reminders of faithfulness. Worship helps reorient the heart. And crucially, fellowship, community.
Ah, right. Not going it alone.
Exactly. That support network, sharing the load, dispersing the weight of it all, it seems absolutely vital for staying the course.
That makes sense, which leads naturally to the idea of global responsibility, doesn't it? The sources talk about the interconnectedness of the global church.
Yeah, the idea that if one part suffers, the whole body feels it, or should feel it.
So what does that responsibility look like in practice, according to the sources?
Several things. Intercessory prayer, again, its importance is really stressed, but also practical material support.
Like emergency aid, Bibles,
Yeah.
livelihood projects.
Precisely. Helping people rebuild. And then there's advocacy and awareness.
Giving voice to the oppressed. Standing up for the vulnerable, like Proverbs says.
Exactly that. And also just simple encouragement, presence, combating that awful isolation.
It's interesting, too, how the sources say those not facing direct persecution can learn from those who are.
Yeah, about radical faith, the true cost of belief, that power of joy in suffering. It's presented as a two-way street. Support flows one way, wisdom and inspiration flow back.
Now, we focus a lot on mission in the traditional sense, but do these ideas apply more broadly? How can anyone cultivate this kind of resilience?
The sources suggest they do. Spiritual preparation is one aspect. Prayer, study, like arming yourself for life's challenges. Adoniram Judson is mentioned as an example there.
Okay, and beyond the spiritual?
Mental and emotional fortitude, acknowledging the inner battles, building support networks, practicing self-care to avoid burnout. That seems key.
And cultural sensitivity.
Yeah.
Understanding different contexts.
Crucial for building relationships anywhere, really. And finally, this idea of embracing the cost.
Accepting that meaningful pursuits often involve sacrifice. Aligning with that call to take up your cross, so to speak.
That seems to be the essence of it. It won't always be easy. And acknowledging that upfront is part of the preparation.
Which brings us to the idea that the sacrifice itself has enduring worth.
Right. The sources ground this in core beliefs: Christ's sacrifice leading to triumph, the early church's faithfulness despite everything.
And that paradox again. Growth happens outside the comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Suffering refines character, deepens dependence on God. Romans 5.35 is often cited here.
And it's not just personal growth, is it? There's a legacy aspect.
Yeah, the idea that the scars, the difficulties overcome, become testaments to faithfulness, inspiring others later on.
That leads perfectly into that concept of worthy scars from one of the sources.
A really compelling idea. It reframes suffering and self-denial not as things to be avoided at all costs, but as potentially meaningful, expected parts of a committed life.
Especially within a faith context. The cross itself being the ultimate paradox, defeat becoming victory.
Absolutely. And Paul's understanding in 2 Corinthians 4, God's power shown through weakness, through trials.
Finding strength in vulnerability. And that metaphor of the scars of the shepherd.
Yeah, the marks you get from caring, from protecting, from sacrifice, they signify love and commitment.
It's a powerful way to think about it. The journeys that matter most are rarely the easy ones.
Seems to be the core message.
So, for you, the learner, as we wrap up this deep dive, let's recap the big takeaway. Suffering, when you're pursuing something important, especially mission, isn't some weird detour. It's often part of the road itself.
Yeah, but perseverance, fueled by faith, by connection, by community, it doesn't just get you through. It can actually transform the hardship. It leads to growth, deepens the impact.
Absolutely. And this isn't just for missionaries in far-off lands. Think about the challenges you face, the struggles you're navigating.
Consider the scars you might be accumulating in your own life, your own work. What stories do they tell about your commitment, about your resilience?
That's the final thought to chew on. How might actually embracing the difficulties that come with striving for something valuable, how might that lead to a deeper purpose, a more meaningful legacy for you?
It's a perspective shift, really, seeing challenge not just as something to endure, but maybe something to learn from, something that shapes us for the better.
A powerful thought. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.